and happy Easter. Thanks so much for joining us today online. I want to start with telling a story that Jesus actually told earlier in his ministry before Easter Sunday, which we're going to get to. But Jesus was one day sitting down and just talking with some friends, and he told a story, a made-up story. We call him a parable, where he makes up a story because he's a conquering king, and he wants to talk about what his kingdom that he's coming to establish is going to look like. And so in Matthew chapter 20, we start in verse 1. Jesus says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work." Okay. Well, at 9 o'clock in the morning, a little bit later, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went out to work in the vineyard. At noon, and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. And then at 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, "Why haven't you been working today?" They replied, "Because no one hired us." The landowner told them, "Then go out and join the others in my vineyard." That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and to pay them, beginning with the last workers first, the ones who came in last. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each of them received a full day's wage, even though they started at 5. When those hired first then came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more. But they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner. Those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in the scorching heat. He answered one of them, saying, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others?" So Jesus then sums it up and says, "So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last." It's a common theme and a common refrain of Jesus' ministry, this whole last shall be first shall be last kind of mantra. But then he also constantly backed it up by how he invested his time and his energy into the least of these. This story has some folks getting upset because they didn't get more when the landowner started giving like a full day's wages amount to ones who had only showed up for work for an hour at the very end of the day. They were upset that they weren't getting more than that. But the real crux of the story was about how it's to God's delight to be able to give as much to the least as to the most, to do things differently than we would do in the world. Because think about it, the world that we live in tends to do good only to those who most deserve it, or who seem to be able to offer us the most in return. So we'll do good for those kinds of people. The world and the way of the world tends to say that we should determine people's value based off of what they're able to do to or for us. Their value to us, right? If they can hurt us, then maybe we'll treat them respectfully because we don't want them to hurt us. We're afraid of them, so we respect them and treat them well. Or if they could really give us some advantage, then we can treat them especially kindly. The world tends to see things through very self-centered lenses, and also to see the people's worth as something that you can quantify. The pretty person with all the personality and thousands of followers versus the unkempt guy that's in front of you in the line of Walmart that has you backing up a few steps because of that potent body odor. Let's be honest for a minute. We're not uncertain of where we're naturally going to be determining and placing value with these people. It's natural for us. But let me ask you, have you ever gone through some stages in your life and after you've gone through them, you look back on them? And when you look back and think of the things that mattered to you, I'm thinking like high school for me right now, like the things that mattered, the things that kind of set people apart, and it made these people better than these people. These were, oh, you got this, or you had that, or you did this, or you did that. Those things mattered so much in the moment. And have you ever looked back and been like, wow, that really doesn't matter at all now? Like in your life, you've grown up and you've matured and things have changed, and you're like, those things that made a difference as to who was valuable or not, or who really, that doesn't matter anymore. we can look back and think, that stuff seemed to make all the difference between this person and that person, and it really didn't actually even make that much of a difference at all. It's because as we advance, we're able to see the silly things that seem to be worth making a big deal about back then. So is it possible then, I wonder, that God, as the supreme author of life, the pre-existent perfect being full of grace and truth and wisdom and power above all that has or ever will be, is it possible that he has a loftier view of things than we do? Right? So as he stoops to engage with mankind, who he created with his very breath from out of the dirt of the earth, the mankind that he has watched and superintended over as it's journeyed from creation until the point of you sitting and watching this video right here, right now. He can see, God can, what really matters most and what doesn't really matter. And he has a perfect perspective for determining those things that simply don't make as much of a difference to him in value. For us, the metrics of success and glory are pretty well established. In Jesus' kingdom, though, they look much different. That's why Jesus is so quickly willing to approach the prostitute as much as he is the Pharisee, the centurion soldier as much as he is the slimy tax collector. For the Son of God, Jesus, God himself, he's stooping to meet each of them alike. So it's pretty much alike for him. He's stooping either way, and yet he's willing and glad to do it. So in the Bible, you often see Jesus with the downtrodden and destitute people that nobody had time for, because Jesus did. But it's really important for you and I to note, and I want to make sure you get this, that Jesus wasn't just a teacher and a Messiah figure for those downtrodden and destitute people alone. Even in Jesus' death and burial, which we celebrate this weekend especially, I want you to look at what we see in the death and burial of Jesus and who's there. Matthew 27, starting in verse 57, he says that when it was evening, there came a rich man, just want to make sure you notice that, rich man from Arimathea named Joseph. So Joseph from Arimathea, who also was a disciple of Jesus. And he went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took that body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. So here's a rich man who's a follower of Jesus. And then in John 19:39, it says in John's gospel about Jesus' burial that Nicodemus also, who earlier had come to Jesus by night, years earlier, came that day after Jesus had died, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds in weight. So Nicodemus, we know from, again, earlier in John's gospel, is a religious guy. He's a Pharisee. In fact, because he's a Pharisee, religion is his profession. He's a religious leader by trade, and yet he's decided to follow Jesus. So, but wait, did you catch for a minute here in Matthew's, what we read from Matthew, that there was a mention of a woman in what we read there about who was sitting across from the tomb of Jesus' tomb, and when they laid Jesus' body there crucified, it was a woman named Mary Magdalene. And she actually shows up a number of times as a follower of Jesus and in his entourage and all that, and we don't know a ton about her or her backstory. What very little we do know, though, comes from Luke's investigation and then his report in his book. And so I want to read you 2 verses from chapter 8 of that book. He says that soon afterwards, Jesus went on through cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12, which would be the 12 disciples, were with him. And also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Now that's pretty serious, right? Now we don't know exactly how to take that. If it refers to 7 different demonic attacks at different times in her life, or maybe 7 different ailments and kind of representations at one time that Jesus freed her of, or whatever it means. But here's what we pretty much confidently do know, amidst what we don't know. What we do know is that there's no way of interpreting that whole thing that doesn't make it obvious that it was really serious, really bad, and that she came from a rough backstory. 7 demons, whatever that means, not good. And Jesus had as part of his regular entourage then, a woman who'd once been possessed by 7 demons that he had cast out of her. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I'm thinking that if you're sitting down to a nice fancy dinner or something like that with Joseph of Arimathea, rich Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, and Mary Magdalene, and you don't know who any of them are, and this is after they've met Jesus and all that, and you don't know who any of them are, and you're going to want to get to know them and their story a bit, and you ask them as a whole, so how did you each come to meet Jesus and get to know him? I'm going to bet that Mary's answer and her story is probably going to be the one that has you the most wide-eyed. Like, whoa, that's interesting. See, Jesus didn't just come for the Mary Magdalenes. He also came for the Josephs and the Nicodemuses. And after his death, Joseph could help with providing a tomb. So the rich still played a part in what Jesus was doing. And Nicodemus could help providing the actual burial supplies, as we read. So the religious can still play a part. So the rich could play a part, and so could the religious. But it was the rough around the edges kind of people that got to play some of the most significant parts in Jesus' life, ministry, and in his burial and death in the Easter story. In fact, let's look together at the Easter story as told by John. John 20, verse 1 says, "Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene," go figure, there she is, "came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb," the one that Joseph had put there. "So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, 'They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him.' So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen clothes lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes." Let's keep on reading. "But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look in the tomb. And she saw 2 angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping?' She said to them, 'They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him.' Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she didn't know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?' Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, 'Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away.' Jesus said to her, 'Mary.' And at that mention of her name, she turned and said to him in Aramaic, 'Rabboni,' which means teacher. Jesus said to her, 'Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.' Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, 'I have seen the Lord,' and that he had said these things to her." So, she was the first human on the earth to get to proclaim the good news that Jesus had risen from the dead. That is can you imagine? That's a monumental honor to be the first human to get to go ahead and let people know that. A monumental honor given to a very unmonumental person, by worldly standards, that is. And that made a monumental difference in Mary's life, as well as every other unremarkable or even downright bad person that Jesus showed love to. They were totally aware, these people like Mary Magdalene and these other sinners that would come to Jesus, they were often totally aware that they were the workers who got hired at 5 o'clock. And yet still were being given a full day's wages. Like, I know I didn't earn this. This is crazy. I mean, Mary was a woman, okay? And just so you know, by ancient Near Eastern standards, her testimony, like if there was a crime, couldn't even be used in the court of law. So this would not be then the first pick for many people to choose to be the main witness of a highly controversial and a world-altering moment like Jesus apparently raising from the dead. The PR team at headquarters would be having a fit. No, not Mary Magdalene, not a woman, definitely not Mary Magdalene. She would be down near like last place of people to pick to proclaim such big news. Like, it's a woman, and she used to have 7 demons, and yet in the kingdom of heaven, Jesus' kingdom, the one that he came to establish and the one that his death and resurrection set in firm motion, that in Jesus' kingdom, the last are going to be first and the first are going to be last. See, if you get this, as we end our The King Who Stoops to Conquer series, I want to give us one more thing to know about our conquering king. It's this: Jesus conquers by generously giving new life. See, the old lives got to be overshadowed by Jesus' powerful love. Mary Magdalene's old life, yes, it was worth noting because of how much she had changed, but it was overshadowed. That's how Jesus operated in his ministry during the years before, and that's how they had a chance at new life. But that's part of the catch for how this whole thing worked and why it worked so remarkably well for people like Mary Magdalene. Because they were blessed by knowing that they were definitely sinners in need of saving. It was often actually the rich and the religious who struggled way more in seeing the value of what Jesus was coming to offer because they thought they were pretty decent. And for too many of them, and too many since then, maybe too many today even, their decency robs them of deliverance. Because the truth is that in comparison to Jesus, in comparison to God himself, our decency is anything but decent. And it's in recognizing that somewhat painful reality that our decency isn't that great, that we have nothing intrinsically of value to prop up to make ourselves look good in front of God, that actually sets us up for our greatest victory. See, it's the victory that Jesus actually won on that Easter weekend. When he went to the cross, he was making payment for the deficit between us and God. See, God couldn't be any less perfect. He could stoop to love and to conquer. We've been talking about that these past few weeks in this series, but he couldn't stoop to just lowering his own who he is and allowing us into his perfect throne room in heaven to be in his presence like we were back when we were first designed to be in the Garden of Eden and all that. So he's got to figure out how to, he can't stoop and change who he is, but he can stoop to love us. You know what? He chose to win the victory over sin and death by laying down his own life. He tasted death so that we could feast on life. But honestly, if Jesus had just died and that was the end of it, that was it, just period, end of the story, it would leave a lot of uncertainty, or maybe even make certain that we knew that his way was nice, but it was ineffective. Because he still died, and that was it. And his kingdom of the last shall be first, and the first shall be last, then died with him. If he died, he still died, and his promise of life more abundantly that he had promised earlier died with him. He still died, and with him died our hope of a second chance at a Garden of Eden together with the Father and people from every nation and tongue. A place without sin or death or destruction or betrayal or sickness or sadness and all of the brokenness that we've experienced in this life was a hope that we had. But if Jesus just died and that was it, then it was not much more of a hope than the kind of wish we have when we see a shooting star. But Mary Magdalene, who once had been possessed by 7 demons, when she went on Easter Sunday to pay respects to a crucified king, instead found a resurrected one standing in the garden with her. The death of Jesus wasn't the end. Jesus had actually won and purchased a new life for us. So Jesus' promises were firm and unstoppable because his love is just that immense and his power is that strong. See, thinking of the love of Jesus, Romans 5, Paul says, "But God shows his immense love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." The word shows there in that verse means to put on display by holding it out in front where it's in clear view and everyone can see it. So Jesus was raised up on a cross in clear view of a crowd of sinners that thought some of them thought they were just fine. Some of them knew they were sinners, and some of them were somewhere in between. And there was at least one Roman centurion soldier that day who made the move from one camp of, I think I'm just fine, to the other camp of, oh, this was truly the Son of God that day on the cross when Jesus died. And Jesus on the cross, there in clear view, displayed just how great the love that God has for great sinners is. It's a love that's as boundless as God himself. A love that we're invited to accept and then have transform us from great sinners into great saints. Those people who are the people of God. Not that we're perfect in ourselves, but we are being made perfect in the sight of God by Jesus, who generously gave us new life, because that's what Jesus did. And oh, that we would know the breadth and length and height and depth of that love. I started with a story of Jesus's, and I want to end with a story, if I can, of my own, actually. And it's a story about the night that I told Madeline that I loved her. You see, the night that I told Madeline I loved her, I was swept away in emotion and all of that, and it kind of burst out of me. I'd already known that I loved her, and so that night, just as the course of events went, I told her I loved her, and she kind of clammed up and just kind of looked at me. She was like, I'm not sure how to respond, and she didn't want to just respond carelessly, which is admirable that she didn't have anything. She's like, I'm just going to take and hold on to this and process it, and it's admirable. But it was also maddening for me that night as I left her and I went back to my apartment that night, and it's like midnight, and I'm just like freaking out going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just told her that. Like, we've only been dating for a very short time. I'm dropping the L-bomb. I'm telling her here's what I'm going to do. And in my late night brilliant idea, I decide I'm going to sit down and write her a letter that explains why I love her, and says that wasn't just something I just threw out there or just said accidentally. I really do mean it. And so I wrote this really vulnerable letter, really kind of poured my heart out a little bit. Definitely didn't look, safe and careful. I put myself out there, and then I took this letter. I drove back to where she lived at the time, and her car was parked out front. And I know this sounds crazy. I'm glad that she had her car unlocked and didn't have an alarm, but I opened up her car door. It's unlocked. So I put it right on her dash so that she would see it when she got in her car the next morning first thing. So I did that, drove home, and then early in the morning at that point, then I go to sleep. And I wake up the next morning, and I haven't heard anything from her. And after a little while, I know she's awake, so I just text her, and I'm just like, hey, good morning, because I haven't heard anything yet. And she's like, good morning. That's it. She doesn't say, good morning, I got your note. Nothing. So I text her, did you get the note? I kid you not. She texts me back. She goes, what note? The one I left in your car. And then she says, oh, I let my brother Tim borrow my car this morning. I wonder if he found it or knows what you're talking about. I don't know what I can explain about what internally happened, but it wasn't good that moment. I'm like, oh no, oh boy. Just so you know, she was totally messing with me. She had gotten the note. She is a funny person, and she appreciates her humor more than I did in that moment. Let's just say that. But here's why I tell you that a little bit embarrassing and definitely like gut-wrenching story for me. It's because of this. A profound demonstration or proclamation of love deserves, demands a response, right? If you're going to put it out there, a response is needed in some way. And let me tell you, Jesus' demonstration of love is hands down the most profound, the most immeasurable, the most generous, and the most life-changing proclamation of love that ever was and ever will be. And it demands and it deserves a response. So let me ask you here to really think seriously about this. What's your response to Jesus' unmatchable display of love? Because it's supposed to be that it's accepted with gratitude and lived into. But maybe for some reason you got off at a different exit. Maybe you've instead denied it. I don't need that. Or maybe you've speculated as to whether you needed it at all. I'm not sure if it's really for me or not. Or maybe you've delayed dealing with it because you're just preoccupied, you got other things, other more important things going on in your life. I mean, maybe you decided instead, actually, your exit was that you decided you're too bad. So it couldn't have been that this love is for you, but whatever detour it is, the detour on the path to new life that Jesus offers to people like Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, and Mary Magdalene, who had been possessed by 7 demons, whatever the story is, Jesus is generously offering to conquer by giving you a new life. Doesn't matter whether you were one of the workers who came in at 7 a.m., start of the day, or 5 p.m. He's got grace for you. There's new life for you and for me. Doesn't matter if you're a spotless Nicodemus or a 7 demon-possessed Mary Magdalene. He's got grace for you. There's new life for you. And not just for you, but for others all around our world right now who don't yet maybe even know that there is this chance in Jesus for a new life from the one that they've been living, the one that's kept them captive, bound, and broken. And so, a profound demonstration of love deserves and demands a response, both from us and for us to be a part of the kingdom that Jesus has come to build. So, what is your response to the risen Jesus? That's not just a question for right now. That is a question for the rest of your life until the day that you get to meet him.